what time is it? 10:05.
10:05.
Yep.
10:04.
It is 10:05 on September 19th, and this is Steve Mills, Chair of Property Tax Advisory Council, and I'd like to call the meeting to order that we have today. And first thing we're going to do is move to item B, which is the roll call and certification of quorum. Steve Mills is present. Mr. Stephen Dunstan?
Present.
Mr. Bill Green?
Present.
Mitchell Katin is absent today and noted. Ms. Deborah Bockham?
Present.
Mr. Ken Parsons?
Present.
And Mr. Paul Penning is not present yet, but he's expected to be here, so we will acknowledge that whenever he does arrive. And so with that, we'll move to item C, which is approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was January of 19. Seems like we met since then, but I guess not. Has everyone had a chance to review that? And can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ken Parsons, and can I get a second?
Second.
And a second by Mr. Bill Green on approval, and the minutes are approved. So that will move us to item D, which is open for public comment, and any person wishing to address the advisory council can complete a public comment form, but we see none. So we will move on to item E, which is the staff reports. And the first out of the box is licensing division with statistics and information updates. And hopefully all the members have received the information. If not, you have it on your screen before you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Tarsha Red, manager in licensing, and we have
My name is Sam Torres. I'm the team lead for the Blazers under licensing. So I just wanted to go over with you, you have in front of you as well, the licensing statistics for the fiscal year 2019. And as you can see, there was a slight increase from fiscal year 18 to 19. But basically you had your senior property tax consultants, a little bit of a decrease at 731, and your property tax consultants at 1,094. So from fiscal year 19, you just had a slight increase. That is about it. You guys had that in front of you as well.
Y'all are on a June to July fiscal year, or y'all on a calendar?
August to September.
Okay.
I mean, September to August.
Gotcha. I was wrong on both counts.
Okay. And then we had a couple of items from our last meeting regarding online payment options and showing senior sponsors. And it requires programming to have those done. And with other programs that we have and requirements that need to be taken care of, those are not things that we can do right now, and they may be considered maybe sometime next year.
Tarsha, there was one thing that we had discussed about, and Mr. Pennington had brought it up about reciprocal with IPT,
Right.
with the CMI designations. And we had kind of discussed when Deborah and I were together, and
Mark.
and with Mark and Lorraine on the education hours and stuff like that. We probably wanted to defer that and discuss it offline.
Right.
So I'm glad it's not on our agenda, but certainly will be in the future, I'm sure.
Right.
And we'll probably want to notify Mr. Pennington when he gets here of that, because I didn't see it in the notes, but it's certainly something we want to discuss offline.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
So this is Deborah Balcom. You said it's not available right now. Is there any kind of ETA or thought of when online payments and or senior sponsor recognition could be?
It would definitely be next year, 6 months at a minimum.
Okay.
And we
So
can
it might be
bring it up.
doable in the next year or so, but
It may be,
maybe
yes.
not? Okay.
Yes.
And
And
some-
I'll bring it up again to see if
Sure.
they have time.
Not necessarily indefinite?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So some of the other programs have it already, that y'all regulate, and ours is because of the, I guess, probably the protocol with the hours and the lapse in requirements, stuff like that, or is it just a programming issue?
Not really, but we want to try to do higher populations first, just because it's so many more licenses
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
affected. And I'm sure that there's some other factors that go into that equation to determine what gets done next. But again, I'll bring it up again and present it to our IT governance so that it gets on the table at some point.
It's purely a
Hopefully within
thing of,
another year.
it's purely just a thing of convenience, and
Yes.
like everything, we don't write checks
Trust me,
anymore.
we would love to have it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
All right, you're
Uh,
welcome.
Anybody have anything else? No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Tarsha. Next, we move to E, item 2, Customer Service Division. Statistics.
Good morning, advisory board members. My name is Tuan Nguyen. I'm one of the managers for this program.
What's your name?
Tuan Nguyen.
Okay. Thanks, Dawn. Morning.
So I have a couple of updates for y'all before I go into the statistics. Since June, customer service has moved over to this building. We're now on the second floor. And we also have upgraded our phone systems software as well to help process some of our upcoming volume of calls that were expected for the new fiscal year.
Is that why the parking lot's so full?
Yes, that's partially because of it.
Parking is a premium. It's all your fault.
But other than that, so I'm going to go straight into the report. So since that's the last time we met in January, there has been an increase in stats for January, February, March, and April and May. May looks like when it's peaked up, and it's slowly kind of calmed down a little bit in June. We are getting a lot of inquiries about the examination questions, about eligibility and extending eligibility. We're also getting questions about the applications, new application renewals and statuses of those. And then our reps usually will follow up with the customers on those incidents. And then we usually do get the same request that if they can do it online, and we're also working with our team and get that information back to them. Other than that, I'll be happy to answer any other questions you have for me.
Taryn, one question. Is most of the calls or most of the inquiries, because it's kind of a personal question. Like, for example, if you send it in, and say it's due on the 10th, and you, just hypothetically, you send it in on the 10th, and how long is it, most of the questions like, how long does it take to get it posted? Because there's like a 10, 20-day lag sometimes before your registration. Your education hours are in there, but you send the check in, and I guess because of that, everything's manual and old school at that point, where you have to actually take the check the box, and is it most of it, a lot of it, those kind of calls, like when are they going to post this? Because I've got to practice.
So for the type of calls, yes,
Yeah.
they are checking on the status for those, and those are usually something we'll escalate to our other divisions like licensing or whatnot to actually see, like, hey, this customer did send this in, we see it, and we check on the status of with that team.
So is it when it comes in, like say when I renew, which I do always last minute, I send it in, and then does it go to the accounting department and they bank the check, and then it goes to the next compliance where they take the application, and go, yeah, he's done this, and
I wouldn't know in details about the process. Maybe
I mean, is that a fair question? I mean, I'm
I
curious.
know a little bit about the process, but not the entire details, and
Yeah.
I understand where you're going with that one.
Chair, this is Mike Erzman, with the Department of Licensing and Regulation. Now, are you asking, once a application with a check is submitted, what's the process that it goes through?
Yeah, and I guess because y'all have so much volume with so many different occupations
Right.
and professions, is it just the lag because of the volume, or is it the process, or
Right.
what?
I think Tarsha can come up and answer those questions specifics, and a lot of it has to
I'm
do
not
with
being
different areas.
overly critical. I'm just trying to think, because like if you're practicing with an expired license, that's an issue.
Correct. So, I'm sorry, Mark had a question for me, so I didn't hear your
Oh.
question.
Yeah, so just the lag, like between when you send the application in and before it gets posted and updated, not necessarily that you get your paperwork back, but just that it's posted online, that you are in compliance.
Right.
that process? Is it a 5-day deal? Is it a 10-day deal? Because I've seen it go anywhere from 10, 20, 30 days before it gets posted.
So.
Not myself,
for a-
not just myself, but other people as well.
Okay, so when the agency receives the application, it goes to our mailroom. So the mailroom has to receive it, finance does their part to it, and we receive it in what we call a batch. So once that batch is received, it's processed. Individual licenses are processed the day that the licensing division receives it. Sometimes there's a delay because of what people may have sent in. Maybe they didn't complete all the information. One of the primary things that we see is people don't provide their senior sponsor. They may write the license number for the senior sponsor on their renewal, and that's not acceptable. There has to be a form, because we require that sponsor is actually stating every single time
Okay.
that I am sponsoring
Okay.
this person. And that's primarily what we see. Sometimes people send in their paperwork, and maybe they didn't complete all the information on a new application, or sometimes people send the wrong fee amount. It just depends.
Yep.
If they're renewing late, they may send in the regular renewal fee and not the late renewal fee, so that could cause an additional delay.
Okay, so it's checking the boxes, basically?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that, even doing electronic payment will increase that efficiency
Yes.
considerably?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's very helpful.
Okay.
It should be noted that Mr. Paul Pennington has arrived, and he'll be taking everyone to lunch today because of his late arrival. And so we're thankful for that, Paul. Thank you.
If you want to eat at the airport, I will take you all tomorrow.
And so, thank you, Tuan, for that. So now we move to E3, Enforcement Division and Statistics.
Good morning, members of the Property Tax Consultants Advisory Council. My name is Rebecca Burkhalter. I'm a prosecutor for the Enforcement Division, and I'm here to present the statistics for us. And then later, I'm going to do a presentation about the complaint process for the Enforcement Division. But just now, looking at the statistics, I don't want to read them to you. We did resolve more cases than we opened for this particular program this year. And although it looks like there's a big goose egg on here, I wanted to tell you guys that we do have 2 final orders that are coming. I don't want to discuss the details of them because they're not finalized yet, but they do involve some penalties and a revocation of a license, but they're not finalized quite yet because they were too close to the date when we did this report. So the next time we do a report, you should see some penalties and final orders on that report. Do you guys have any questions about these?
Let me ask you a question real quick. This is Stephen
Sure.
Dunson. I went to the website yesterday and pulled up violations on the website.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one listed for a property tax consultant. And I don't know what's posted on the website. I can't determine if this is a final order issued, and that's the only one we're posting. And I went to the property tax professionals, and I think there's 3 there, or maybe the other way, but what's posted on the website? Are those actual final orders, and how recent are those final orders? Because there's a lot more history than just 1 in one profession and 3 in the other profession.
Right. I believe you're talking about the administrative orders search page. Is that what you're talking about?
From the website, yeah, administrative order search, you're right.
Uh-huh.
That's what it's titled.
And it shows you I don't have the numbers for property tax professionals because that's not the board I'm in front of
Right.
today. So I don't know anything about those final orders.
Okay, property tax consultants, there's a total of 3 orders issued, 2 individuals. One guy had the order issued against him twice. And I wonder what that's really showing us. I mean, because we're trying to find out who the bad apples are in this whole situation. And this is only saying there's only 2. But that's different from what this is showing right here.
Well, like I said, there are 2 that are on their way. You
Right.
may be able to see them in the administrative orders search. What I'm trying to explain is because they're not completely finalized, the opportunity for appeal, et cetera, is not finalized. That's why they're not appearing on your report yet. But
Okay.
you may be able to see them on the administrative orders search.
Okay. Is there any way to have on the administrative orders search a listing of current complaints on file?
No. That's just not the way the process works. I mean, we have a database of all of the complaints that have been filed. I mean, you have the numbers right here of how many
Yeah.
cases were opened, but we don't have that accessible to the public, no.
Okay. Yeah, I've gotten that database before via an Open Records Act, but I
Sure.
thought it'd be maybe something the department could put on a website so we could see what's out there right now.
Just to play devil's advocate, Mr. Dunson, part of the reason that you may not want to do that is because just because a complaint is filed doesn't mean the prosecutor's going to
Absolutely.
find a violation.
Right.
And I'll discuss that a little bit more in the process presentation I'm planning on going through. But you wouldn't want the public to think that just because there was a lot of complaints filed against someone that there was necessarily anything wrong. And I think that's why we stick to the orders and not just complaints.
Okay. Let me ask you one question on the orders. Is this, what you can see on the website, is that limited like in a time frame?
I don't believe so. I believe they go back further, but I'm not positive.
Okay. I was under, based on what I saw yesterday, it looked like to me it was limited in a time frame because the oldest one we had on here was from 2018. And there's one, the property tax professionals went to 2017. So that's a different group than us, but
Right, but that may be, if you look at your statistics you have in front of you today, the number of final orders for fiscal year 2018 has a 1 right
Right.
there. So it sounds like you found that case, and you found the other 2 that I'm trying not to talk about today. So it sounds like you found them all.
well, I was looking for a whole history, the total number of final orders issued, period.
Sure,
The whole time we've been licensed by TDLR.
sure.
So we can see we got repeat offenders versus having to do an open records request to get something that happened 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. I don't, I'm sorry, off the top of my head,
Yeah.
I don't know how far that administrative order search typically goes back.
And Mr. Dunson, we can find that information out and get it back to the advisory board members to make them aware exactly how, the history of that, so that you kind of know that. But, you know, I think she's correct, is that a complaint coming in doesn't necessarily mean that there's any validity to that complaint.
Right.
And so we.
And
we would
I
wanna
agree with that.
post
I was just
yeah.
asking, you know, why is the history limited to a 1 year or 2 year
And we can
time
find that
frame?
out and let you know.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, because you can actually go into the violations and see who violated and what the fine was.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is only keeps it for 1 year?
It appears that way. I mean, I don't know if
It
that's the
didn't
right
used to do
answer.
that, it does now.
Which that's better than nothing, I'll tell you
Yeah.
that. That's great that you have that. I just like it to be a little bit, the whole history.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to be able to go back and, like Stephen said, repeat offenders and that sort of thing, because we're, you know, one of the things we're trying to do is help police our profession.
I was just told that the database goes back to 2007. So
Online, the one
what you
online?
see on there dates back to 2007.
Okay, so,
But not publicly displaying the name, I think is totally appropriate.
Yeah.
Cause it, here's why. Chief Justice Kavanaugh. You walk into a room, you say you still beating your wife, that's out there. You can't get that back, and you can't unsee things. So just in fairness, until there's actually proof of anything, the person shouldn't be persecuted just by an allegation. So.
I agree.
That's why I think it's great that we don't just throw it out there with just a filing of a complaint.
Right, well-
But having the knowledge of who actually got fined, there was a case brought, there was a case proven by staff, and seeing who it was and what they were fined, I think it's fantastic. And keeping the history out there for as long as we can, because you can click every year and see. I think it's fantastic.
yeah, I like it. You said it goes back to 2007. Maybe I did something wrong in the search because I just hit all, and that's the only thing I got. So maybe I did something wrong. I'll go back and look at it. And I was looking at it not in preparation for this meeting, but for a complaint I'd filed against an unauthorized practice of property tax against an individual, and I just happened to stumble upon that, and that's why I found it yesterday.
And I can tell you that when complaints come in, they are handled through the enforcement division to ensure the proper process is being followed. But if there is actually a violation that they do discover, then they vehemently pursue that to ensure that we're ensuring that your industry is staying, as you say, clean.
Right.
I have a question, and I don't know if I should ask my question because it says Enforcement Division statistics, but then in item F, it says presentation of the enforcement process for complaint cases. So,
That's right, sir. I'm planning on talking for about 10 minutes at you guys about our entire process. But
so if I have a question about something that's been totally resolved, would it be better for me to bring that up at F rather than?
Well,
Read.
what you have before you right now, the statistics is it's a snapshot picture of what enforcement has done and all of these divisions have done. Item F, agenda item F, is strictly informational purposes for this advisory board to understand how enforcement goes through the process of the complaints so that you have an understanding, a knowledgeable understanding of what they do and how resolutions or how complaints are resolved and the violations that go forward with that and the whole process of going through SOA and how they come to the commission. So that's what you will get in item F.
This is Mark Gladney. For item F as well, what we'd like to do, we'd like to stay away from specific references as to a particular enforcement case that you may have in mind, but if you wanted to talk about the process related to that, to the way a case is handled, I think that's what the purpose of item F is.
Let me get this straight. You can't talk about a case that's been totally adjudicated?
I think if we're talking about specific cases, that might be better.
No names have to be mentioned or.
Well, if you wanted to talk about just in general,
Yeah.
I don't see a
I
problem
should
with
wait
that.
till F,
I don't
right?
see a problem with that.
Yes.
F, yes.
well, and just to alleviate some of your concerns, because it sounded like, Member Dunson, you were talking about wanting to know about repeat offenders. There's nobody more interested in repeat offenders than enforcement. And we keep track of all that. Even if a complaint was filed against you before, we know that because of the database that we keep of all of our cases. So if you had a warning letter issued and then there's another complaint filed, we know that on our end. So I understand you looking for the administrative orders to try to find out if there was a previous violation, but there's nobody more on top of did they have a previous violation than us, because we have the records of even if we've issued a warning letter, which does not show up in the administrative order search that you're doing.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you guys have any more questions about statistics? Okay, well, I'll come back and give you the whole rundown. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Just an observation, if you look at the total penalty of $75.83 for 18, it seems minor compared to the amount of hours that are getting put in it. So there seems to be a very low penalty to amount of hours, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be done for sure. It's pointless otherwise. And before we go to item 5, item 4, Paul, I was going to tell you at item 1, Tarsha and Sam talked to us about the licensing and the statistics and information. And we know we wanted to discuss reciprocal with CMI and IPT. And when Deborah and I met, was it in March? We because we were talking about the hours, it's probably better we talk about that offline instead of now. So, or as an agenda item. So we're going to talk about that. We can add that to the agenda if you want to make it, but we thought it was probably better to talk about it offline.
I thought the staff had called me about already looking into that.
Yeah, and we discussed that briefly,
Yeah.
and we just think it'd probably be more productive to do it offline, and instead, just want to make you aware of that.
And of course, that would be with 3 members or less
Right.
to not violate the Open Meetings Act. And also, if members, if you don't mind speaking into the microphone, because we are streaming it live, so we want to make sure that they're picking up all the voices. Thank you.
So we would certainly want you to be a part of that discussion whenever it happens. because I think it's a great discussion. And so now, that moves us to item E4, education, examination, and statistics.
Good morning, Advisory Board members. My name is John Schulwachter, and I'll be representing the Education Examination Division today. Before you are all our stats associated with our division. I believe they're pretty succinct and easy to read. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have, and I have my power staff behind me to answer the questions that I can't answer.
Have we, I talked to somebody on the staff, are we planning to get the test group together to spend the day updating the tests for the 19 session?
And that's the first question that the wonderful lady behind me is going to answer for you.
Good morning, members. My name is Rebecca Armas, Education and Exam. We are working on getting our group together. We're working on scheduling a exam review session for November. We're just waiting for members to get back to us with their availability, but we are definitely going to be looking at the examinations in November on augmenting the item bank, going through, since we just had session, on what items need to stay and what items need to go.
Well, which members have you contacted?
PSI takes care of that, our third-party vendor.
Those guys, sure.
They reach,
sure.
so as long as the subject matter experts that were selected by TDLR answer the emails that we sent out through, well, PSI sends out the emails to ask the availability, when they're able to attend, then we get with the subject matter experts, they let us know their availability, and then we schedule the exam review sessions.
Yeah, but they haven't been sent out yet, right?
The meeting,
No, hey, are you available in November? I didn't get one.
did you, okay, I'll make sure that you do.
Nor did I.
Really?
Yeah, we've been the big test masters.
Oh, I know,
forever.
I've sat in the sessions with you both. That's why I'm surprised you both haven't. I will make sure that you both do.
Thank you.
Right, and I talked to Carl Van Hook, and he said he had not received anything yet, so I don't know.
Okay, I'll make sure.
This may be a discussion for later as part of the rule changes and stuff like that, but with us moving to every 2 years opposed to a year, I think there may be a need where the providers, if possible, they can, instead of having to take an entire 12-hour course online or whatever, that you can take what you need. They can charge the same, but for example, if you have your law and you need your ethics, that you can click the button and say you only have to sit for that 4 hours for that ethics or whatever the case may be. Is that a possibility, that something that you guys can require them to do, or no? I see Lorraine back there, just push her head no. So I guess Lorraine says you can't do that. So is it because, why? I mean, I guess the question is why?
Your turn.
But y'all understand what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Because there will be a lot of situations like that where, you're getting to your last 4 months and you've gone to TapTap, you've gotten certain things, because you may not get all of those, or you might go to another function, the real estate course or whatever, and get part of your time, and then you come up, you go, oh crap, I've got 2 hours left of ethics. Now I've got to take sit another, for a whole 12-hour course.
Right.
Class.
Yeah.
Lorraine Strove, Education and Examinations Division. We cannot require the CE providers to develop a certain type of course or to require a certain number of hours. We approve the provider as in that they've met those requirements to provide education, but from that point on, then they structure their business as far as the courses they want to approve, what the course material contains, especially those hours. And so for us to require them to do a specific thing, then that's getting into their business practice. So we approve them, we encourage them, keeping them informed of those changes, for example, of you going to the 2-year license, but for a requirement, we can't go through that process. We need to make sure that they can still run their business structure as they would want to. Now, keep in mind, even though we're going to the 2-year license and that the continuing education has been adjusted to that, that ideally you would take continuing education 1 year and then continuing education the 2nd year, or even continuous through that process. As you mentioned earlier, I know you said you wait till the last minute, which many of our licensees do. But as a board, you could certainly spread the word to continue people to not wait to the last minute, especially when you were talking about your renewal. Remember, those notices go out 60 days before your license expires, and the reason for that is so that you have plenty of time to renew your license before it expires. And if you have not completed all of your continuing education, at least you've got those 60 days to complete whatever you have remaining. So I know that
Sorry, Mom.
yeah. So I'm, since we are the
Yeah.
Education and Examination Division, we try to educate people in that process and continuously encourage that to happen. And as a board, like I said, you could encourage that as well, which would help with that process.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Can we encourage the providers to offer that as options?
We can encourage them as in, this might be helpful to the industry, that this is something the industry is interested in. I wouldn't be able to
We can-
publicize
Yep, not
that,
dictate it
but-
as a rule, but
Sure.
certainly a suggestion, because I would think it would be very popular amongst our group.
right.
You guys might differ with me, but I think it would probably help their business, actually, because they can charge the same amount. I'll gladly pay the same amount, just not have to go through all the course, but I only
Right.
need a fraction of it.
Right.
So if it can be incremental, and we can click a box and say, this is what I want, this is what I need,
Right.
I'll pay the same. But where can we put that on the agenda as, or an item?
Right.
To provide to the providers?
Well, let me
You're one of
remind
the
you-
providers, right?
I am involved with one of the providers,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
so-
let's kind of go through that process just a little bit. Remember that if they have that 12-hour course
Yeah.
that they've submitted for approval, that costs $100
Mm-hmm.
for them to do that. So if they do the 12-hour course.
Well, not
and
anymore, though.
then-
I mean, it's probably, that will go away, though, right? Under the new rules?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
They could still do 2 12-hour courses. They may want to divide that up, as you said, maybe they want to do just the ethics or the law and rules portion, but for every course that they want to offer, that's an application process, which costs $100. Now, depending upon, remember, you've got your population of how many people take those courses, and then if you divide that out between the cost of applying for the approval of the course, running the course, whether that be classroom or online, you have to take into all of those considerations as well. It may not be affordable, especially if you have a smaller education provider that only provides for a couple of industries. It may not be affordable for them to offer multiple
in my mind,
courses.
Advisory
Advisory
board
board member, yeah, I was going to say, while this is a very good discussion, we have to ensure that we're sticking to the agenda item, which is strictly statistics. And while I understand the concern that you have, which we can take it up and maybe, Lorraine and her group can maybe provide information back to you, in order to make sure that we're meeting the agenda, we probably need to
Yep.
stick with the statistics and where they're at.
Duly
But I
noted.
think
And we
your
can
message has
add
been
that
received, and they
to
will
one of
make
our
that.
next
sir.
education work groups. We can discuss several different
Okay.
things when
Yeah, I
we
think that'd be
meet.
a great place to
Yep.
put it.
Duly noted, Mike. We'll move along.
I have a statistical question. Deborah, when did those classes occur in 2018?
We
November?
offered a November class and a February class. We did not end up offering a March or a April class.
Do we ever, statistically, do we ever look at Does TDLR ever look at providers and pass-fail ratio of the people who attend their online or go to their classes or anything?
What do you mean by a pass-fail
Like
ratio?
if there's ABC company offers, you take this and you can sit for the exam. There's another one. Is there any kind of a, I know they submit their material, but is there any kind of a statistical thing to see these people went, they took the exam, and these were the results?
Well, the statistics that we have are for continuing education. So there is no exam component to the continuing education.
Oh,
I
these
think
aren't
you're
people-
talking about pre-license education, correct?
So, okay, then it says all examinations, the one I'm looking at. Am I looking at the wrong one?
You're probably looking at the actual licensing division one. No, you're right, Mark. You're right, Paul.
So you're looking at the pass-fail for the exams
Yes, ma'am.
and comparing it to what providers?
I'm just wondering, is there, do y'all ever do any calculations that would say, just take September of 18, just say all of the 4 people who took the exam in 17 went to ABC before they went to their test. And it's got a 25% pass ratio. I mean, do you ever do any kind of, to measure the effectiveness of the providers and the educational programs that they're putting on?
I don't think TDLR
No.
keeps those statistics.
You don't do that?
No.
I don't think they know when somebody comes in to take a test who they receive their education from.
Okay.
Sounds like a lot of brain damage. But it would be great to know. So let's move along.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and we'll discuss that again
Sure.
at some point in time, because I think it would be widely used
Sure.
and very efficient.
Yeah, and I'll
for-
make a note of it as well for,
Yeah.
especially when we have our next
And
meeting.
I really would like to get Deborah's input on that too, because she is a provider, because it may be so burdensome that it's like, forget it. But to me, it seems like it'd be a programming issue or anything else for them.
Sure.
Okay, thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you, John.
This is
Mr.
Mark
Lorraine?
This is Mark Gladney, General Counsel's Office. Since there seems to be a lot of interest in this particular item, it might be advisable to consider that as a future agenda item.
Yep, absolutely. We'll put that down.
Could I make one request as well on the statistics we get next time? I noticed here we have the continuing education service providers, how many courses and approvals we have. Could we also have for the initial education, those numbers as well? Because that doesn't seem to be on here. Of those that are approved and that applied, I think there's only about 2, but there may be 3 or 4. I think that goes more to what Paul was asking as well, and I think that's a good question for us to know. How many initial education service providers are there?
So looking at that column that says audit activity, continuing education provider audit, says, do I take that to mean there's 5 providers? Is that right?
The audited 5 providers.
I think there's 20 total, isn't there, or less than that?
I think you're asking just what is that?
What does it represent?
Yeah, what does it represent? What does that indicate?
She's back.
All right, Lorraine Strofe again, Education and Examination, and I have my glasses so that I can read a little bit better now. Okay, Paul, so you're talking about the audit. Just let me. Oh, all right. So this is an audit of 5 continuing education providers. That does not necessarily mean that that was all of our continuing education providers.
When you say audit, Is that when they submit their material to you?
No, we have a auditor in our division that conducts audits on our continuing education providers and training providers. So, for example, in December, there was one provider that was audited. That means the auditor contacts that provider and then asks for all of their records and documents and goes through to make sure that that provider is following those guidelines and rules in Chapter 59 that they're supposed to do as far as giving them their certificates and that kind of thing. So we're eventually hoping to have all of the providers in all industries audited at one point. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Is that it? All right.
We think so.
Okay.
Thank you very much again. And Mr. Director, we're moving on now to item E5, Regulatory Program Management Division, Public Outreach.
Good morning. I'm Russell Tolley with the RPM Division, the program specialist there. Most of my work is answering, for this program, answering questions that we get via phone call or email. Our customer service division does a great job of being that first line of answer givers. And occasionally, if there's something they don't know, they'll refer a question or to me, and I usually work with that. The second bullet point, our IT division is now made available to us sort of a page count. It lets us keep track of how people are using the internet site. And just a few statistics we have, our PTC homepage has had 8,000, roughly 8,000 visits so far this year. The second most popular web page was the pre-license education list that had approximately 2,900 visits, and then followed by the FAQ page, which had 2,300 visits this year. So that's, good for us to know what information people are seeking, and lets us better handle their questions and concerns. As a representative of the RPM division for this program, I'm available for public outreach. If any event comes available and you'd like a TDLR to be present there, I'd be happy to help arrange that for you. And that concludes my report.
Anyone have anything else? Thank you, Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. That moves us to item E6, report from the Executive Office personnel updates. Updates from our last session for 2019 and the communication outreach statistics. So I'll give to you, Mr. Director.
Yes, sir. Presiding Officer Mills, board members, Mike Irasmenis, the Deputy Executive Director with TDLR. Just a couple of quick things that I want to mention. As far as personnel updates, we're in the process of doing hiring. And it all ties into the session. We have a few new programs that were brought over to us. We now are responsible for all of the fuel pumps. So when you go out and put gas, the regulation of that and the as far as the metering devices, the calibration of those now falls solely on TDLR. It was brought over to us from the Texas Department of Agriculture. We're still in the interim of trying to get everything worked out, but we have full authority over that, and we're working towards that. Another program we will have that is coming over to us is motorcycle ATV education, which we believe falls right in line and nicely with our driver's education program that we have here. So because of those, primarily those two programs, we have a lot of hiring that's going on, and we're looking at hiring almost 100 new employees, FTEs, will come to us. I believe at last count like 95. So along with that, we did receive some money. So we received about $2 million in appropriations to be able to create a new licensing system. Currently, we have, I believe, about 9 different systems that we kind of monitor all of our licenses. So we're looking at trying to consolidate into one. It's going to be a multi-year project to get us where we need to, but we believe that through that we should be able to have one system to do licensing for all of the programs that we have. Along with that came some FTEs also. A large component of a large component of what took place during the session was related to human trafficking. If you were keeping up, you saw that. We also are part of that discussion. We received 9 FTEs and to bolster up our human trafficking section within TDLR with the programs that we administer, primarily, massage therapy, some of the other occupational licenses. There's a large component of human trafficking that takes place in those industries. So we're in discussions and working with the AG's office, law enforcement, to ensure that we can do what we can on our part to eradicate human trafficking in Texas. So that's a big part of push of what we're also doing. We also had a huge omnibus bill which went in through and kind of cleaned up a lot of the programs that we have, and they were tweaking certain things and removing certain things. As an example, one of for some reason it caught the eye of some of the media in Texas, but in our boiler program, you no longer have to have your license or certificate under glass. That was removed. For some reason, that became a large meaning. What was happening previously was that any certificate that had to do with boilers had to be under glass. It specifically said under glass. That's been removed, but for some reason, the media caught that and they thought that was a huge story. So we kind of fielded those type of questions. So anyway, so we had a lot of things that took place in that omnibus bill that was a big part of what we were doing. As far as, one thing I was going to mention is that some of you that are, I think most of you on this on this board, may or may not recognize my name, but I was previously the chairman of this agency and now serve as a deputy executive director. So you're on this advisory board, so you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Or, I'm sorry, one of the two, depending on how you want to take that. So anyway, I want to move on to some of the communication outreaches that we have performed. I know that Russ gave you some information, but over the past 6 months, the property tax consultant website has had over 14,000 views in 6 months, which is about 78 a day. So we have a lot of people going out to the property tax consultant's website page of our website and doing some searches and kind of bumping around. We can kind of tell you 63% of those accessed it from a desktop computer, 33% did so from a smartphone, and 4% did so from a tablet. So I could tell you that I went out and pulled this data, but the reality is we have a web administrator that gave us this data. So he gets it. I don't know how he gets it. He may be making up numbers, but they sure do sound good. Some of the top reasons for visiting the site is about 2,200 individuals were looking for a pre-licensed education list for a property tax consultant, PTC program. About 1,600 visited the frequently asked questions. Almost 1,000 went for examination information. 871 looked at the forms, and 569 looked at continuing education. So our web administrator, Josh Schroeder, who is fantastic, is able to pull this data every time somebody goes out and visits a website and takes a look at a different page. And so we're able to pull up data on each particular program that we have and tell you what they're looking for, what the questions are. And we take that information, also take information from customer service for questions that seem to be repetitive. And then we'll put that out on our website so that hopefully we can drive your licensees to our website and be able to get the information that you need readily available to you without having to make a phone call or call in E&E or RPM, so that you can get that question answered immediately and get right back to work. Because that's the purpose of you having the license, that you want to get back to work and make sure you get that. So we're trying to drive as much traffic as we can to our website, but in the process of doing that, we have to make sure that our website is updated, that it's current, and it's providing the information that you're looking for. So that's all I have under the executive update. If you've got any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
First off, personally, thank you for reappointing myself and these people, because these are all great people. One of the things, Director, that we had talked about before was, and I think it was probably part of the sunset, but rolling property tax consultants under the Real Estate Commission. Has there been any more discussion on that, or is there any update on that? I know it's a big interest to us all.
I think that along with a lot of other things in our different programs is a continuous conversation. I think once we get deeper into the conversations with Sunset, we will know exactly kind of the direction that they're wanting to go also, and what that conversation might either heat up or just cool off. So it's early for us to be able to tell you that until we start meeting with the Sunset Commission.
And just point of reference, when does that usually occur? At
We
the end of
actually
this
have,
session?
we actually, which I'm sorry we didn't provide that, we'll get that to you. We had to provide a self-evaluation report to the Sunset Commission, which was submitted to them at the beginning of September. And now we're in the process of scheduling our meetings with Sunset to be able to come out. It's going to be we're anticipating probably a 13, 14-month process to go through that whole scenario with them. They will be coming out in the month of October, November to meet with us on our different divisions that we have, that we submitted to them. And then they'll be reaching out to your organizations, all the other organizations of the industries that we regulate, to get information from you, to find out how are we doing, what do we need to improve on, what are the strengths, what are our weaknesses, all those type of things. So they'll be reaching out to your organizations also and your industry.
And so those meetings that you have with Sunset, are those public meetings, or are those just?
No, there's just between Sunset
Okay,
and
gotcha.
TDLR.
Yep.
So speaking of public, you have the opportunity to be able to make those comments to the Sunset Commission whenever they actually
Open it for
hold
public.
hearings
Yes,
on
sir.
TDLR.
Yes, sir.
Our industries will be invited to come in, and you'll be able to publicly, praise us or admonish us. But those will also be posted. We'll ensure to put that out on our website and send it and blast out so everyone is aware of it.
Yes, sir.
Because we do want the feedback. We want to know those things that we need to improve on, and those things that we know that we're doing correctly that we need to strengthen.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much. Does anyone have anything else?
Yeah,
for
Ken
Director?
Parsons, I know we've had an opportunity to go ahead and let you guys know how we feel and where we would like to be as a group. We did that last year. There was a bunch of us here on the council now that were there at that meeting, and we made it pretty clear that we wanted to stay here. So do we need to have that meeting again, or is there an opportunity to go to the Sunset Commission?
Yeah, you'll have an opportunity to go to the Sunset Commission and state that.
Okay, so
comment.
are all the things that we put up there not this year, but a year ago almost from now, will that still exist, or do we need to do that again?
Well, it exists. I would state that you probably want to put it back in front again, just to ensure that that information is out there.
Okay.
And so that they're aware. I would say as much information as you can provide when Sunset holds their hearings would be the best.
Okay, yeah, I think we made it pretty clear last year
Right.
that we think we're comfortable here.
Well, we appreciate that.
We didn't
Thank you.
see any need to move. If it's not broke, don't fix it thing. And now we have some experience with this group, and we hate to lose that, so.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
you bet.
I have a question, it's Deborah Balcom. So in the self-evaluation that you provided to the Sunset Committee, did TDLR make any recommendations or any requests of licenses that they're oversee to keep or
There
let
were
go?
some recommendations made of license that we believe that are maybe not needed any longer.
Okay,
And not so much transferring, but just not needed any longer.
okay. Okay, and that wasn't us.
Not that, not.
We like our
that.
licensing.
Yeah.
Well, Director, thank you so much
You bet.
for your time and information.
Thank
Very,
you.
very helpful, very useful. And you're going to have a bigger parking problem, it sounds like.
Well, it's part of that, I'm glad you mentioned that, is that we secured some additional lease space in this building
Yeah.
for the expansion.
Yeah.
Customer service, as you heard, moved here
Mm-hmm.
in June, so they're now on the second floor, which freed up a floor out in our downtown location at the E.O. Thompson building, but we already have plans for that to kind of expand out even more. You know, people are now going to start getting some elbow room
Yeah.
to be able to start expanding out and stretching out a little bit. So we're a growing agency, and along with that, which is, we've been fortunate and blessed to be able to be recognized by the legislature in that. But it does come with some challenges that we're tackling, and, we welcome those challenges as far as the expansion, but it does require, which, as you mentioned, all that to say, Yeah, we'll have some parking problems.
Yep. And you can always have those millennials that want us to telecommute, you know, so.
Just build parking.
Just have it that way, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much again. So that will move us to item F, and Rebecca is going to come back and give us a presentation on the enforcement processes for complaint cases. And we appreciate you preparing and going through the detail of that. Looks like it was quite a matrix for the processes.
Sure. You guys had a lot of questions during the January meeting. So
Mhm.
we put this on the agenda just to make sure everybody kind of understands the process a little bit better. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Once again, this is Rebecca Burkhalter. I'm here to describe the enforcement process for complaint cases. So the Enforcement Division enforces the statute and the rules. That's basically what we do. So before I get into explaining exactly how the machine that enforcement works, I kind of want to explain, when do you guys see enforcement most often? In addition to those licensing statistics that I already went through with you guys, another time you see us is when we work on the criminal history guidelines for your licensees. So every single applicant's criminal history when they apply for a license is checked. There are some general guidelines that are considered in all cases, and then there are some specific guidelines for specifically property tax consultant licenses. So if someone has a crime that involves fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, deceptive business practices, crimes that involve stealing from an employer, tax fraud, bribery, perjury, crimes against properties such as theft or burglary, that can render somebody ineligible for a license. So if a crime renders somebody ineligible for the license, that case is also handled by the Enforcement Division. Your advisory board helped us develop what those guidelines are. So that's one time that you would see us. Another time is when we develop the enforcement plan for your particular program. So the enforcement plan sets a range of penalties for the violations that are already in the statute and rules. It doesn't make new violations, it just categorizes them into an easy-to-read format so that everybody's aware of, if you violate this, this is what the potential penalty could be. So we develop those in conjunction with the work groups for every single program that we regulate. So you guys are responsible for helping us determine how egregious this violation should be, where, in what penalty class that should fall. So thank you guys for your input on helping us get that already finalized.
And Rebecca, I want to interject just very briefly. Stephen Dunson actually is heading our work group on that. And they were supposed to have a report, but I think they're going to delay that a little bit because of some things that have come to light. So
Sure.
that will be coming down the pike at some point, and you can probably at the end, you can probably give us an idea of your timing on that and all that.
Next meeting will probably, this is Stephen Dunson, next meeting will probably be January, February or something. And we're going to have a couple of meetings after some information we got today. So hopefully we can do it by next meeting.
So it's actually probably beneficial that we waited till we had
Yeah,
a better
very
explanation of things.
Yeah.
Sure.
So this is very timely and
Sure.
much appreciated.
Sure.
So I just want to interject that one point. It's
Absolutely.
coming. So-
Absolutely. And just because it's not just you guys here today, we also have people watching. Just in case anybody wants to see where those criminal conviction guidelines are or the enforcement plan are, they're on our website. So if you go to tdlr.texas.gov, at the top there's a bar that says license types. If you go down to property tax consultants, and then if you go on the right-hand side to licensing and exam information, there will be a link to the criminal history guidelines and the enforcement plan. That's true for any program that we regulate. So it's all accessible, it's all on our website, anybody can go look at it. So we see two basic types of cases in enforcement. One type is called an inspection case. An inspection case originates from the Field Operations Division. It's a separate division from enforcement. They conduct periodic inspections of places that require that. We're not going to talk a lot about that. You guys don't have periodic inspections for property tax consultants. So your program is entirely complaint-based. So if we don't receive a complaint, we don't know to check into anything. I didn't tell you guys, but I supplied a flow chart as part of the written materials. I'm hoping to be a lot more interesting than reading that flow chart. So I'm basically going to tell you the same thing on the flow chart. But if you have any questions about the process, the flow chart should help you. So let's talk about the machine. We kind of consider enforcement to be like a big funnel, and at the top get dumped in all of these inspection cases, not for your program, but for other ones, and then the complaint cases, and then at the very bottom, we pop out finalized cases, either whether they're closed or whether there's a final order on them. And so it goes through this process, and so that's what I'm here to describe today is the process. So the enforcement division is 117 people like myself, and it's comprised of intake, investigations, prosecutors like myself, and then we have a huge legal support staff as well. So let's start with intake. That's 19 people, and their job is to determine whether or not the complaint involves a program that we regulate or a person that we regulate. If not, sometimes we'll refer the complaint to another agency if they have jurisdiction. Intake will also request further information if there's not enough information to find out if a violation has been alleged. And then if there's enough for the case to move forward, intake opens a case, and then the case is assigned to an investigator to investigate it.
Are most of those people paralegals, or are they just staff?
Intake is usually just staff.
Okay.
But they take complaints for every single program that we regulate. And they're pretty good at what they do. So if the complaint is sufficient, and we believe we have jurisdiction, et cetera, they go ahead and open a case. Then the case goes to the investigation section. Their investigations is 42 out of the 117 people in enforcement. And the investigators are stationed all over the state of Texas to better serve our citizens. They are simply responsible for gathering the facts. They need to be familiar with the law and know what to investigate, but they do not make any ultimate legal determination about whether or not a violation has occurred or whether a penalty or outcome should be pursued. They're essentially our eyes and ears in the field. So once the investigator prepares an investigative report, the next part of the funnel or the process comes to a prosecutor like myself. So there are 17 prosecutors. We have one vacancy at this time. 15 of us handle these complaint and inspection cases, and 2 of us are dedicated only to those criminal history cases that I was talking about. And that's all they handle, are criminal history ones. So the prosecutor reviews that investigation report to determine if there's enough to prove a violation has occurred. So after you review the report, you have essentially a few options. You can close the case if there's no evidence that a violation occurred. I'm going to start kind of with the easiest, and then we'll go to most egregious. So the next step is, let's say the person has taken some corrective action after they were investigated and done something, and perhaps a warning is a better result. We can issue a warning letter that says, you're kind of in violation, you need to watch it, straighten up and fly right, that kind of a thing. The next thing is, if the prosecutor deems it's necessary, the prosecutor can issue a notice of alleged violation. So that will explain what the violation the prosecutor believes has been committed. It assigns a penalty to that violation, and then the respondent receives that letter, and they're allowed to request a hearing if they'd like. And this is also when most of our cases are settled, because when we send out the notice of alleged violation, we attach a settlement offer usually to the back of that, and it is a reduced penalty. So if you know you did this, you know you committed the violation, you don't really have any beef with it, you can pay us a fine and move on. This is how a lot of our cases are settled here.
Rebecca, the settlement hearing, sorry to interrupt you. The settlement hearing, does it go before the TDR board at that point?
So the settlement is not actually a hearing.
Okay.
It's actually a settlement agreement attached to the back of the notice of alleged violation.
But if they request a hearing, who is that hearing before?
You're jumping ahead of me,
Okay,
just by this much.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm on my way though. So the penalty that the prosecutor assigns is based on that enforcement plan that I was talking about. Now, for the property tax consultants, you guys have a range of the Class A violation, and they're either fines or sanctions. The Class A violation subjects you to an administrative fine between $500 and $3,000. On the opposite end, a Class C violation can subject you to license revocation. The reason for the penalty range is so that the prosecutor has a little bit of discretion on setting a penalty that is commensurate with the violation. If it's something that threatens consumer harm or it's a threat to public safety, those are considered to be worse violations. When I told you guys earlier that we are very concerned about people who commit multiple violations can result in higher fines. And that's why we're keeping track of that very closely. So the enforcement plan being online and being readily accessible gives a consistent work product to all of the prosecutors who are working different programs and also your programs. But I wanted to let you guys know the enforcement plan does not obligate the department to impose a penalty just because we find a violation. That's prosecutorial discretion. And then it also, the enforcement plan is not binding on the commission when they make a final decision on the contested case, which is getting towards what you're talking about. So let's say the respondent agrees and they sign that settlement agreement. That becomes an agreed order, and that's one of the orders that pops out the bottom, and everybody gets to move on. If the respondent doesn't respond at all, we can issue a default order, and that's the two cases, I believe, that did not make this statistics report are default orders, I believe. So if any licensees who happen to be watching, if you receive a letter from the department, you should really contact us right away, because failure to respond can result in a default order. So getting to your question, if they request a hearing, what happens is we go to the State Office of Administrative Hearings, and the hearing is held before an administrative law judge. It's kind of like a mini trial. The state is going to lay out what we believe the violation is, and really it's did the state meet their burden in proving that that violation occurred. So the judge will hear the case, collect evidence from both parties. The State Office of Administrative Hearings is set up to be a neutral fact finder, and then at the end they issue what is called a proposal for decision. That's not final. That has to go to the commission of the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation for who makes the final determination. So those cases that go to SOA result in what we call a commission order. Those are rare. It's really only about 2% of all of our cases that go to the State Office of Administrative Hearings. So it's not a lot.
And they're all tow truck drivers, right? I'm teasing.
Tow does go to SOA
Okay.
hearings, yes,
I was
that does happen.
Kind of teasing.
So I have a couple of little follow-ups. Councilmember Dunson, you were asking about that administrative order search. The magic thing about us posting this online as it's occurring is one of the prosecutors upstairs made me aware that search result only goes back 2 years. And I know for your particular program, that seems a little silly because the numbers are not very voluminous. But if you, I believe the reason for that cutoff is because in other programs, if you search for cosmetology final orders, and if we just opened it to any order over the past, however many years, it would be very voluminous. So I believe that's probably why they have a 2-year cap on it. We also talked a little bit about quarterly letters last time. Mark Gladney pointed out that if a complaint is filed, the respondent and the complainant get a quarterly letter until the case is closed. That's just a service that the department offers, and then when it's closed, you usually get a letter saying that it's closed. So that's basically it, guys. Like, the complaints and the inspection cases all go in, it goes through this funnel, and then out the bottom you either have closed cases or you got final orders, whether they're default orders, agreed orders, or commission orders. So do you guys have any questions? I see Mr. Pennington does.
Mr. Pennington has a question.
Yes,
So
sir.
I followed you all the way through the chart. And I don't file complaints. I mean, against people who are in my industry. I did it once, and it morphed into like the largest fine this agency ever put on somebody in my business. But I can't remember, I think it was 2018, maybe, I filed 2 complaints. And one was like, it was obvious to me that the guy doesn't know what he's doing, and y'all issued a warning, which was appropriate.
Okay.
The other was to this repeat offender. If I go to your website, there's complaints, okay? And I'm just baffled that it was a warning letter. It was premeditated, it was done in multiple counties, you had cooperation from appraisal districts, and it was a warning letter. I just don't understand how the prosecutor, whoever that is, would come to the conclusion that it's a warning letter. I'm lost.
Well, I'm not here to discuss any
No, I know. I'm just saying,
specific cases.
I'm just saying,
Um,
I'm just saying, I followed your chart,
Mhm.
and I'm baffled completely that at the end of the day, it resulted in a warning letter against a repeat offender. You've made such a big issue about repeat offenders.
Yes, sir.
So,
Those are a big deal.
Can I pick up on that, Paul? Because this is Deborah Balcom, but I kind of am with Paul. I'm somewhat shocked at the process that is described here, and my perception of that not being followed at all in a complaint that we made last year. And I too am baffled that with the evidence that I know we had, that the outcome was there was no violation in that particular instance. At what point, I guess, in this process, because one, no one from TDR ever talked to me directly,
Okay.
even though I was one of the main witnesses and complainants in the case. So when this is being, as thoroughly done as I would hope that they are, right? I am shocked that in my particular situation, we got a letter that said that the prosecutors found no violation of any rules of a different agency, like a different license group. They said they didn't violate any of the property tax professional rules. And we basically went back and said, you're absolutely right, they didn't, because he's not a property tax professional, he's a consultant. And so we were kind of shocked on that.
Sure.
And then the response was, well, we just made a typo in the letter, there's still no complaint, there's no violation. And so I guess what point in this process, when a decision is made that there's no complaint, and we have a serious objection to the fact that that complaint isn't valid, can we get back involved and talk about this? I mean, it seems like all these steps that we say are being done were
Right.
not done in this particular case.
Well, board members, real quickly, just so you know, I think that what we don't need to do is deviate from the fact that this is not a process by which, when you file a complaint, and then we say no complaint or there's no violation per statute or per rules, that we're going to go back to you and say, well, but there is, and let me tell you why. Because our prosecutors have have discretion in this process to state, okay, there was really no violation that occurred per rule. Now, while we find that maybe the industry frowns upon this particular action, if it's not stated in statute or rule, then there is no violation that has occurred. And then I think for as Mr. Pennington was stating, the kind of the frequent flyers, what we look at is, as a repeat offender, would be a repeat offender of that violation. We may have people in industries that have a violation that's occurred, and we question maybe the integrity of that individual in that industry. But the question that we have is, was there an actual violation that occurred? Was it severe enough? Was there a remedy that took place, an action on their part? There's a lot of factors that come in from the prosecutor side to whether they want to pursue it or not to find out. So
Right.
I think that there's no mechanism by which we come back to you to say, well, we didn't find anything wrong, so what do you think? There's no mechanism for that.
I guess my question, though, is that in this particular case, what came to light during our investigation was, one, prior felony convictions of theft and fraud, which are a major issue in our industry. And yet,
You said your investigation?
whenever we were looking into everything that went on that led up to our complaint,
Okay.
right? And that we ultimately
research that you
filed.
performed?
Yes, the research we
Okay.
performed. We found prior felony convictions on this particular individual. And so he was allowed to get a consultant license. He's allowed to maintain that consultant license, although that's one of the sticking points of what you're not allowed to have in your history. And yet he has that. So I don't think that's been considered. And then additionally, once we get into the complaint, our specific complaint, I don't think these steps were followed. And that's what I guess I'm asking is, how do we as a committee and as advisory council help ensure or hold accountable that in fact all of this is followed?
Well, I tell you, a lot of that is just, you have to trust that we are following this process, and I know that may be difficult for you to accept, but with so many programs that we have, while it may on the surface seem that it wasn't followed, I can tell you that in order for us to function with the various amount of industries that we regulate, we have to be stringent to this process.
Maybe a fair question to Deborah's point, and actually to Paul's too, is there a formal background check, criminal history check done when they apply for the license?
Yes, sir.
Because that would have picked the felony
Yes, sir,
convictions up.
it should have, unless it wasn't on there for some reason.
Yeah, so that, there may have been a lapse there. And like to Paul's point, we all know who this person is, or this company is, or whatever. And it's almost like this might be something that y'all can discuss as a committee, but a 3 strikes and you're out. Because they know, it's just a risk assessment. They
Sure.
say, we're going to pay the big fine. What's going down the road, we'll do it again next year.
Right.
We'll pay the fine. And so it's 3 strikes, you're out and done. But the failure of, well, 2 things. I mean, I don't know I know just small amounts of it, but it's almost like it was filed under the wrong industry first.
Yeah.
And so maybe background on that, and then, which, it's probably more than a typo when they send the final order out or whatever. So that's weird, but I think probably we should look, maybe, Paul, what do you think of a 3 strikes you're out? Can that be placed? Does it have to be a rule change, or how do we look at
There's a
that?
penalty matrix that we follow, which we
Right.
have.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
got
was gonna say.
you. Hold on, Mr.
I'm
Osmond.
going to go ahead and turn it back over to her.
Yeah.
I think we all
Yeah.
should.
I'm jumping at the bit, guys. So if there really are 3 strikes, you're out. And now, I'm not talking about 3 strikes like you had 3 complaints and none of them went anywhere.
severity of
But
it.
if you have 3 final orders, your penalty matrix, even for Class A violation, the 3rd violation subjects you to $3,000 to $5,000, and this is the least egregious of your violations. If it is the 3rd, it subjects you to a $3,000 to $5,000 violation per day, if not corrected, plus 1 year full suspension up to revocation. So you guys basically have what you're talking about already as part of your enforcement plan. Now, the part that most concerns me, Councilmember Baucom, about what you said is, if you really were the complainant on the complaint, our process is that the investigator should have contacted you directly. If you were just listed as a witness, it's possible that the investigator would not, if they felt like they got enough information to complete their investigative report without contacting you. But if you're the complainant on it, you should receive a phone call and or email from the investigator to try to hear your side of the story. That's what they do. So that's the only part of what you said that concerns me. But the procedures I've outlined are the procedures we follow in every single case for every single program we regulate, and we keep it consistent for all the programs for good reasons.
Can I
So,
clarify an issue?
sure.
If the matter that I was discussing, and is it possible that the prosecutor said, well, they've never done this particular thing before, so they're going to get a warning on it? Is that possible?
Our goal as prosecutors for enforcement is always to gain compliance. Our goal is not really to punish. Our goal is not really to fine and make a lot of money. Our goal is to gain compliance. It is possible. I can't guess at why a prosecutor would issue a warning instead of issuing a fine. It is possible they say that this hadn't been violated before. It's possible they took corrective measures. I can tell you that every single time a case is closed, either for insufficient evidence or for a warning, the prosecutor puts a note in the file that explains the prosecutor's reasoning. Now, I believe that to be attorney-client work product privileged information. So that's not necessarily something that we release, even if you did an open records request. But if you get a warning letter on a case where you were the complainant and you're wondering why the prosecutor ended up there, call the prosecutor and ask them. Like most of us, like myself, are happy to explain why we came down a certain way on a case.
This is Councilmember Does. A couple of quick questions. Is there any, like, SOA appeal available to a complainant if their case is determined by the Enforcement Division not to have any merit? I mean, let's say it goes to a prosecutor and they just issue a letter saying, like Deborah's case, it's done. Or is there a secondary appeal that there's not?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Now, you could always file a complaint again,
Yeah,
but
Word is different.
no, I mean, no, there's not really. If you get a closing letter and you believe it was really the wrong action, and you call the prosecutor and the prosecutor goes, wow, I didn't think of it that way, it's possible that they can, in very rare circumstances, reopen the case. But usually they have documented in the file why they decided that there was no violation.
Okay.
So if there's something new that gets brought to light and intake missed it, investigations missed it, the prosecutor missed it when they looked at the file, and you're providing something new, that would be an extraordinary circumstance where we may decide to reopen the case. But no, there's not really, no.
Okay, I didn't see it in the flow charts, why I asked. And let me ask you one other situation. Let's say the maximum, let's say we do everything we're talking about, and we want to revoke that person's license. What does TDLR do if that person shows up at an appraisal district or an appraisal review board and continues to represent people without a license? I mean, you're no longer licensing that person. How do we stop that action from occurring? Is there any way you can think of?
Well, the hearing would be illegal. It wouldn't be a binding hearing.
But who's going to enforce that?
Well, the board requires you to provide your license number. No.
No.
They do when I do.
They do when I do.
Let's say somebody has had their license revoked or has been rescinded for a number of years, and they're continuing every year to go before the boards and the districts.
Well, number one, they're breaking law.
Okay, but
And
who's
number
going to enforce
two,
it?
When I go to a hearing, I have to put my number down and the expiration date.
Okay, let's say
When you sign the affidavit.
they lied about all
Well,
that.
and they're doing that, but they're putting it, it's not getting checked.
Well, these guys aren't the policemen of the
Okay, so
appraisal district.
who's in charge of checking that at the check-in at the ARB? Is it the appraisal district or appraisal review board, or is that a responsibility of the TDLR for regulating unlicensed activity in our profession?
I don't.
Excuse me. This is Mark Gladney, General Counsel's Office. The agency does have the ability to seek injunctive relief for unlicensed activities, so.
It'd be against an individual?
It's to the individuals, but not to the district.
To the individual.
So.
We would
that
have to be
brings-
notified.
Okay, so this may go to another question I have for later, but let's say the person checking you in at the ARB, they're a licensed individual for TDLR, property tax professional. Does any responsibility fall on them to check our licenses?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So the person or individual at the appraisal district or ARB, appraisal review board, they're a licensed individual under property tax professionals. Do they have any responsibility at all to check the licensee status of a property tax consultant when they come before them?
Not to my knowledge, they don't have
the ability or
there's no
authority to do that?
requirement for that.
They have the requirement, but they don't have any mechanism in there to do it.
I don't think they have the requirement, actually.
I don't think they have the requirement either.
You may be
But it
right,
sounds like you're
actually.
talking about property tax professional requirements. Is that right?
Yes, he is.
Well, that would be something to take up with that advisory council or advisory board.
Well, I'm asking, does TDLR have anything in place where cross licensees, like we have with our industry, have any responsibility to the other licensee? 'Cause I've had
It would
property-
depend on if that's in the statute and rules. If it's in the statute and rules somewhere that they have authority or are required to check those licenses, then that would be a violation. If it's not in the statute or rules that that's not required of the PTP to check the PTC license and whether or not it's valid, it's not a violation.
Okay.
Now, if it's not a violation, you are welcome to contact the legislature and lobby for a law change, but until you do, I can't put it in the enforcement plan if it's not a violation of the statute or the rules. Does that make sense?
Let me give you a small, minor illustration of that. We can walk into an appraisal district, and they'll say, let me see your license. What's your number? When we sit down with them, and we have to show it to them, or we don't get to the next step. We can't sit down and go, okay, let me see your license.
I do that.
We can do it, but they can just say, pound sand.
Now,
So-
we're getting off point.
Well,
Yeah, we're off point, but that's the illustration, so.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking about enforcement because
Yeah.
I don't think the property tax professionals have any authority to ask us if we have a valid license.
I mean,
You mean they're not required to?
I don't think they have the authority or requirement to do it.
I agree with that. It's at the property owner level. The property owner has the right to complain. But that's.
But what I'm talking about here is like there's on the listing on the administrative orders search, an individual, let's say we increase our enforcement to where somebody loses their license, property tax consultant, but they continue to do it. What do we do in situations like that?
They're operating without a license, and so your question, as I understand, Steve, is who has the authority to do something about somebody operating without a license?
Stopping that
A
behavior.
cease and desist.
Basically.
Yeah.
And we do issue cease and desist
That's what
orders.
it
Our
would be.
enforcement division does do that.
But if they don't stop, if they continue to do that, what authority do you have if they don't have a license?
Well, Mark-
Again, that gets into the injunctive action that we would be
Right.
taking. But, I think we're starting to sort of stray into areas that are
Yeah.
a little bit outside the agenda item
Yeah.
on this one.
Well, I do have a question.
Sure.
Ken Parsons. One of the things we talked about last time was that if you file a complaint, there's an update given to the person filing the complainant
Yes, sir.
periodically.
Yeah, it's a quarterly letter.
Okay, and so I don't know if anybody up here has gotten a quarterly letter?
I have. This Stephen does. I have. They've been quarterly, been on time.
Okay, well, I was part of filing a complaint as well, and
Okay.
to my knowledge, we did not get one. So.
We didn't either.
Okay, so I'm just saying the consistency of that might be something to look at.
It should be very consistent. And what I was trying to explain to Councilmember Bacom is, if you're listed as a witness on there, you're not going to get a quarterly letter. You need to be listed as the complainant. If you are listed as the complainant, you should get that quarterly letter. We send them out unless you submitted the address wrong or something. There's no reason that you should not be receiving that quarterly letter.
Okay, and that would be to the person filing the complaint?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is that also true if there is no activity during that period?
That's right. You still get a quarterly letter.
Okay, well,
This is Mark Gladney, General Counsel's Office. I've worked for several different agencies in their enforcement divisions, and I got to say that in other agencies that I've worked at as an enforcement attorney, it's pretty rare for some agencies to actually do something like that. A lot of agencies consider notice quarterly letters as kind of a courtesy, an extreme courtesy. So for the enforcement division to be doing that, it's not something you see across the board with state agencies. The other thing, in some state agencies, enforcement attorneys they sometimes look at themselves as they're representing the state of Texas, not necessarily always representing the complainant. So the interests of the state of Texas and the interests of a complainant may not always coincide. So, and there's a lot of other things that an enforcement attorney has to take into account, which accounts for the prosecutorial discretion. And in this particular situation, we're bound by subchapter F of Chapter 51, with regard to the assessment of penalties and sanctions, and there's 4 to 5 specific criterion that the agency has to go through, and the prosecutor in particular, to look at each case. Each case is fact-driven. they're not all the same, and there could be things that are going on behind the scenes that the respondent is actually doing in response to the complaint to mitigate his or her damages. So you could have a situation where you could have a person who has maybe a more egregious background, or somebody might consider an egregious background, than someone in a same or similar situation. But that respondent may be doing some things to help his or her situation that could change the opinion and the evaluation of the prosecutor, not to mention the fact that there are also evidentiary factors to take into account and how a SOA judge would look at a particular case. Because ultimately, if you're going to take a case of SOA, you also have to judge how that SOA ALJ is going to assess the facts in the case. And SOA has their own policies and their own ideas as to what penalties are proper, what penalties may be too extreme, what penalties may not be extreme enough. So there's a lot of moving parts on each and every single one of these cases that a prosecutor has to take into account, not just what a complainant wants or a witness wants in a particular case. So it's, when we say prosecutorial discretion, there's a lot of things that just go into play here and a lot of things that have to be considered. And not always does a complainant get what he or she may be looking for or consider it to be proper justice, but it's only because you may not be aware of everything else that's going on behind the scenes.
Mark, let me, I can't remember which year it was, call it 16 or something. A particular senator asked me to get some information from the TDLR. They got the information to me. It was very timely and stuff, but when I was looking at all this stuff, this particular group that I'm referring to, I was just astonished that they had these cases. I thought when the Attorney General gets on you and with a big 7-figure fine, and you guys got on somebody with a big 6-figure fine, I would think that would promote better behavior, okay? And so when this particular senator asked some stuff and I was looking, I was just floored that this particular group had complaints out. I mean, it's like, so my point is, if we are trying to get proper behavior, and I said this with the other complaint, the warning was totally appropriate. Didn't know what, it just doesn't know.
Sure.
Okay? But in this other case, it's like, bad players at some point in time, maybe, I don't know, if we're trying to promote better behavior, and it was, it was orchestrated and it was illegal and it's all those things. And I just think maybe TLR needs to look at bad players who are repeat offenders and look at them, is their behavior getting any better?
And I assure you, there is nobody more interested in catching repeat offenders and catching bad actors than the Enforcement Division. That's exactly what we do. If you have multiple violations, we increase the penalties up to license revocation. So that's exactly what we do. Another thing I could tell you guys to reassure you a little bit is if a complaint is filed and the case gets opened, you have a case number. You can always call the prosecutor or the legal assistant. The legal assistant's phone number should be on the quarterly letter that you receive. You can always call them and ask them what's going on with the case. Like if you want to call an update, I do that very often. So that's another thing that hopefully will help quell some of your fears. Like if you have a case that's opened, like we may not give you a lot of details, but we may let you know it's still open, it's not finalized yet, but we're pursuing penalties. The prosecutor can give you updates if you call and ask for them. So please feel free to, anybody listening, feel free to file complaints if you believe they're warranted, and feel free to call us for updates.
Rebecca, this is Bill Green. So you have revocation, and then their suspension, is that a prorated suspension?
Yes, sir. The suspension typically includes some kind of conditions on that suspension.
Okay, so the tip to land the plane here.
Sure.
We appreciate all the information.
Absolutely.
There will be much more discussion, I'm sure.
Sure.
And I'll have a question for you offline at a different time.
Sure.
About representation and stuff like that, but we can do that offline.
Excuse me, one more thing, and I don't want to step on Rebecca's presentation, but one thing I always used to tell licensees, whether or not you stay in business, whether or not you keep a license or have a license or get a license, it's entirely pretty much in your control.
Right.
And as I said, when I used to do enforcement, I used to tell people when I was handling complaints, because we would get accused of all sorts of things. You know, you guys are trying to put us out of business. You're trying to get money for the agency. You know, prosecutors would be accused of all sorts of things. I'd always tell people, our job, as Rebecca said, is compliance. And I would tell people, basically, there's a competition superhighway out there amongst licensees. It's our job to make sure you stay in your lane as prosecutors. It's our, you know, if you go out of your lane, initially, it's our job to nudge you back in your lane. Now, if you continue to go off your lane, you start going off the highway, then we're going to work a little bit harder to make sure that you get back in your lane and you stay there. Now, if you don't want to be in the competition superhighway anymore, that's entirely up to you. And then we're more than willing to take you off the highway, and usually have to find something else to do. But the keys to your continued licensure is basically in your hands. You know, we're not here to take it away from you. You're going to take it away from yourself if you continue to do what you're not supposed to be doing. Yeah, and I would encourage y'all. Mr. Pennington, you were saying you don't like to file complaints against other licensees. Well, I can tell you, in other agencies, where we get most of our complaints is from licensees watching each other. They
Right.
watch each other like hawks, and they file complaints. That's what you should be doing. If somebody's out there doing something they're not supposed to be doing, then there's no shame, there's no harm in reporting them. It gives us something to do. We can't keep our eyes on everybody, but y'all are out there in the field. You know what's going on.
Can I make one comment?
Sure,
I think that this is Deborah Balcom again, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the hard work that the Enforcement Division does. I really do. I know there's a lot of complaints filed out there, especially in a lot of other industries. Our industry is very small.
Sure.
I think collectively, some of our concern here is we've got 3 here on our board that typically do not file complaints.
Sure.
You know, I've been practicing for 25 years. I filed this one, and I don't feel like it was handled well. Paul's saying that he doesn't feel like his was handled well.
Sure.
So when it's risen to our level, that we're the ones saying, hey, there's something wrong here.
Yes.
There's something wrong. And I think that's more of our concern. So we appreciate the explanation, so we know more about who to communicate with and how to communicate.
Absolutely.
And we can definitely follow up on that. So thank you.
Sure. Do you guys have any other questions for me? Mr. Green looks like he does.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
All right, thank you, guys.
Well, certainly, our integrity is the only thing that we own. That is it. That's the only thing we own. Everything else is purely borrowed. If there's no opposition, can we take a 5-minute break?
How about
I
10?
think we're going to have, do I?
How about 10?
Whatever y'all feel comfortable with, 5-10 minutes. Because I think probably the last part, we may have more discussion, and I really need to go to the bathroom. So we're going to break, let's break for 5 minutes. Okay?
Thank you. Paul, how are you?
Can we adjourn?
So we will continue on. Thank you all for letting us break for just a minute there. And so that will leave us to item G. And would it be best if I read out the entire description of that? I thought so. So item G is a discussion and possible recommendation on the proposed amendments to existing rules at 16 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 66, 66.20, 66.21, 66.25, 66.70, and 6680 regarding the Property Tax Consultants Program. The proposed rules clarify registration and regulatory provisions, increase the term length for a renewal certificate of registration from a 1-year to a 2-year term, modify the number of continuing education hours to be consistent with the new registration term, and also reduce the fees on registrants. The proposed rules address and finalize 2001.039 and to implement changes recommended by department staff and members of the Property Tax Advisory Council. And with that, Mark, I will hand it to you.
For the record, Mark Gladney, General Counsel's Office. This is a little bit like deja vu because this rule package is something that I brought to you all last year. And having said that, there are very, very minute changes to this rule package, which, so just sort of giving you a little bit of a timeline, you recommended publication of this rule package back in October of 2018, and then we brought it back, and you recommended adoption to the Commission on January 23rd of this year. And today, the rule package, I'm going to be asking you for a motion for a recommendation for adoption to the Commission. Now, we did have to take this rule package and pull it, and we withdrew it back around March 15th of this year. And the reason for the withdrawal was to allow for modification of the implementation date for changes to continuing education hours associated with the increase in the registration term going from 1 to 2 years. So basically, the major change here was in 66.25, and that was in subsection B, where we decided to go from May 1st, 2019 to May 1st, 2021. And it was brought to our attention by Ms. Balcom that this was going to represent a bit of a problem certainly for the continuing education providers, and I believe also the private providers as well, to be able to ramp up, as well as the licensees themselves, to be able to go to 24 hours of continuing education. Pretty much we were asking for y'all to do that on a dime. And it would have affected certainly some individuals who kind of fell in between when their license expired, shortly before or after May 1st of 2019. So the main purpose of that change was just simply to give the licensees advance notice that we were going to a 2-year license effective May 1st of 2021, and also that we were going to increase the number of continuing education hours from 12 hours to 24 hours. We also made an adjustment as to how the 24 hours was going to be allocated. So in 6625, we basically increased the numbers of hours related to instruction in Texas law and in ethics. We increased those hours as well, and we took a few hours away from some of the other areas that are in the rules as well. So that was pretty much what we did for this particular rule package. Now, we did publish the rule, the rule back on July 12th in the Texas Register, and we gave 30 days for public comment. We only received one. Ironically, we didn't receive a comment on the change related to continuing education, and I do believe that you have the information in your packet. What we did receive was a comment related to the fees, and the fees were adjusted in the fee section, 66.20 80, where we increased the fee from $75 to $135 for a registration. And then we reduced the fee to the recognition for a private provider in subsection H and to 0. And in subsection I, we also made it 0. And the reasons for that is, we weren't actually assessing those fees in the first place. And certainly under private providers, they're governed by the TWC, I believe in section 8, chapter 802 of their rules. So they're the ones who have the jurisdiction over private providers anyway. And the commenter basically thought that regarding the proposed change in the fees for the renewal and the $0 fees for the private provider recognition and annual fee, the commenter thought that the fee increase that we put on y'all was basically subsidizing the fact that we were reducing the fees on the private providers to 0. And that wasn't the case at all. He wasn't taking into account the fact that it was a 2-year license. So in actuality, y'all are getting a $15 decrease for a 2-year license as opposed to us doing $150. So that...
You'll notice he's from Tennessee.
Pardon?
You'll notice he's from Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes? Oh, I did not know, and I didn't want to mention any names here.
We're not mentioning names, he's just from Tennessee.
Okay. But that was our response, or at least is our proposed response to that particular sole comment. So, having said all that, what we're asking for today, what staff is asking for, is for a recommendation to adopt the proposed amendments to this rule package as presented to you today.
So let me understand it, Mark. You presented the idea to us, we put it out in the world for a certain amount of time for comments, and today is when we put it in stone?
Today is, we're just asking for your approval to recommend adoption to the commission, so we're asking for your blessing on this.
And Paul, for your benefit, to give you a little bit of background, Deborah and I came and sat down with Mark and Lorraine back in March. Yeah. And the only we had one discussion about maybe having, well, the big thing was we wanted to shift more law and more ethics and take away some of the appraisal and consulting stuff. So we thought that had some merit. And then the other thing we talked about, which I think Mark was going to kind of look to see if we could actually have it, was have almost like an apprentice type classification, because you get these employees from different, maybe from an appraisal district, and so you can have maybe an apprentice position, and their requirements are different. So I don't know if we're going to talk about that later or not, but we didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. But that's the only background I can give you. We kind of just looked at the timing and all that, and the fees.
Well, I make a motion, we adopt it. We've been talking about it for a long,
Yep.
long time.
So I have a motion from,
Second.
and second, I have a motion from Paul Pennington and a second from Ken, and so could I have
my
a?
wife.
Yeah. I've got some plaque that's breaking loose in here, so can I have a vote?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. So passes and approved to adopt the rules of Chapter 66 as they are presented.
Okay. One last thing, and I think this is for Mr. Pennington's benefit. As I said, we did increase for the registrations after May 1st of 2021. We did increase the number of instruction for Texas law and ethics. So it's going from basically 3 hours on Texas law to 8 hours, and then for ethics from 1 hour to 4 hours. We certainly we're taking that into account, and your concerns were definitely on the mind of the staff in the workshop when we were talking about it.
Yeah, that's where we kind of talked about doing the reciprocal with IPT to see how we can enrich that and if there's changes to be made or what. So perhaps we do that offline together collectively or whatever with the.
And staff's more than happy to talk to you, Mr. Pennington, about that particular issue. And I do know that we've had some correspondence, I believe, earlier this year with regard to that issue. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that moves us to H, recommendations for agenda items for the next council meeting. I had down payment online for renewal, and Tarsha had already addressed that. That's going to come when it's ready internally. And then I also had down the ability for taking segments over the entire PTC hours, and so that was addressed as well. And so, council members, is there any other agenda items that we could discuss or put on our next agenda?
I think we've had the matrix of the penalties hovering for a while, so I'd like to see that brought to us to discuss. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
So,
And that was the penalty matrix, you said?
Yes.
so if there's no no problems with that, we'll add that to the next agenda. Anything else, anyone? So maybe we'll do, after y'all have a chance to meet as a committee, to discuss the penalty matrix and what needs to be beefed up, or recommendations from that as a committee. So, say by, what's your timing in the fall? We are in the fall now, right? So maybe February or so?
Well, how often do you recommend we have a meeting? I know we went a long time, we didn't have it for years. Now we're doing it, is it every quarter or
Twice every year.
twice annually?
We've had, this is the second meeting for this year.
Well, can I
say-
ask the staff a question? If the testing committee gets together and updates for the 19th session, does that have to go in front of the board to or it just gets done?
No, it does not.
So as soon as we're done, it'll work its way
Right.
through?
Correct.
So I'm thinking January or February, maybe next meeting.
And then the education would be when?
We're going to do it in November, I guess.
November. So, what did you say, January, February, Steve?
Chairman, what we can do is we can look at some dates. Again, we have to schedule that accordingly with all the other advisory boards that we have. But we can send out a couple of possible dates, maybe end of January, 1st of February, somewhere in there, to see who's the availability of everyone, and
Yes,
we can
sir.
kind of move from there.
That'd work.
Mr. Director, probably, anything probably after April 15th is probably not, no bueno.
So we need to
for
go, we
us.
need to be prior
So,
to that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And so after those two meet, and then prior to April 15th, just because of our own critical
April
dates.
1st now.
April
Okay.
Yeah,
1st
April
now.
1st, yeah, true.
Yeah. We'll look at a February, March.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And this is Mark Gladney. And just to get some clarification, I was heading back here when you all were talking about, did you want to have a meeting regarding the penalty matrix?
We have a committee.
Work group.
Work group, yes.
Yes, sir. We're going to meet. We've already discussed it one time. We're going to meet again and come back in that next meeting and discuss it as a committee.
There will not be a quorum. It will just be.
Right, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll make sure Enforcement Division reaches out to you and get that done and starts working with you.
Yes, sir. So if we have no other items, I'll move to item J and ask that we adjourn. Can I get a vote that we adjourn now? So first,
So move, we adjourn.
moved by Mr. Parsons and seconded by Paul Pennington. So that will close our meeting for the Property Tax Advisory Council on today, the 19th of September.